Hey everyone. In this latest episode, I sat down with Drew Owen of BigPxl, a digital marketing agency, to talk about why attribution is really one of the most misunderstood topics by marketers today. We talk about things like no two buyer journeys being the same and the importance of setting clear client expectations when it comes to results and knowing how to clearly communicate how your marketing campaigns are contributing to pipeline and revenue and where to get reports like that to be able to get that seat at the table that you've been looking for. So tune in as Drew and I really dive deep into this topic and how there's really a fundamental shift in what's happening in marketing attribution today. Let's get into it. Let's start with, I think the obvious, right? So maybe if you could just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, what you guys are doing, and bring us all up to speed.
My journey with marketing started in college. So I'm from Springfield, Missouri, here right in his heart, right in the middle of the Midwest. And I went to Drury University and I interned with a local lifestyle magazine here in like 2002 or 2003, before the internet really had taken off, and loved it. Fell in love with it. I would go out and sell an ad, and I'd help them design the ad. I'd take it back to the graphic designer, and then it would go in their magazine, and then you'd hope that they got results from it. That's really where I started, and I really enjoyed the creative side, the strategic side. I know one of my first senses of it felt like a drug that I wanted to keep taking, right, was a local tattoo parlor, and we came up with an ad that was a head of lettuce and said, "Let us be your tattoo parlor." And then the next one was an orange, and it was, "Aren't you glad you came in?" And we had this kind of corny, like fruit, vegetable campaign that was just fun, and they had some success with it. And from there, I really enjoyed it. I left and came back a couple times to that company and watched marketing evolved over the years. And then in 2015, I came back and helped launch a new magazine for them. And ultimately, I started losing business to digital marketing. And I started having a lot harder time to sell it. And people were saying, "Well, I can do this on Facebook. I can do this here." So it just became a little more difficult. So, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So I joined the digital marketing company that was Jump Six at the time. Eventually, we rebranded and renamed to what we are today, which is BigPxl. And so the last 4 years, I've been in digital marketing, but I've been in marketing my whole life pretty much. Worked as a baseball agent and got to work on some marketing campaigns for my players. And so I've had a pretty vast experience with different types of marketing, but digital marketing has been such a joy because there's so much you can do, and it's complex, and there's a lot to it. And so, but that's what I've been doing the last 4 years. And I started out as a consultant here. Eventually, I was director of sales. Now I'm the general manager, and so I get to be a part of all the fun big accounts that the consultants bring me in on, and a lot of strategy, and that's where a lot of inbound comes into play. So that's my role here. So
I want to actually go back to something you just said, which is what I saw was a big shift to digital, and it's evolved over time. When you sort of picked up on that and you started moving into digital, what did that mean? Like on a practical scale, like you had a client that was coming to you, and what kind of services, what were they asking for that you were like, I got to latch onto this and roll with it?
I believe traditional media has its place, and we've even done some traditional media here. But it's awareness, right? It's branding. It's really hard to start to have kind of a deeper level conversation with the client, which goes into some type of funnel. It's more high level in its awareness, and you're going to be seen in front of that specific audience that channel brings you. And so where I started to latch on to digital was just wanting to just go a little further with the strategy with clients, and knowing that we could really get into a potential ROI with Google Ads, and understand what that looks like, how it operates and how it works with your other media, how it works with your website. I felt like there was a resource and a value that you could bring to the client that really was more of consultative, that really got more into the strategic side. And once I came over here, is an immediate need. And people really, there's a lot of insecurity in digital marketing because they don't understand it. And when people don't understand something, they get frustrated. So I love the educational side, try to help them understand how it all works. And I think that was the biggest connect for me was how I heard a lot of times, well, how do I know if my marketing dollars are working? How do I know what I'm spending, if it's worth it, right? And, when you're talking awareness, they have to wrap their brains around the power of awareness and branding. And there's not much you can say or do from a trackability standpoint. Oh, let's put a QR code on this magazine, or no one's going to do that, right? And so just being at the digital level really allows you to just really get into the weeds with them and help bring an immense amount of value. And that's ultimately the biggest thing for me that our consultants here, and that's also what led us to Inbound, which we'll get into. But how do we keep that conversation going another layer? That's what ultimately the connect.
The pendulum, like most movements, you tend to, either you're on one, it swings way to the left or way to the right.
Yes.
And I think we may be on the, one of the edge points, where, when it comes to attribution, when it comes to like the effectiveness of awareness ads. And I say that because, digital marketing in general, when it started, like everybody was like 100% all in performance marketing, like show me how to track and measure it down to the click and the penny. And what happened is we because we could track it, what ends up happening in the organization from usually the top down, they start to think that, if you can track it and you can measure it, those are the things we ought to be focusing on. So, I think about conversations that I've had in the past, like show me the CAC by channel, right? And let's map it out by channel. Give me Google, give me Facebook, give me an email campaign, give me like a print media, give me whatever.
Sure.
And if you break it down like that, and I don't think there's any marketer on the planet that's not listening to me right now and thinking the same, like, yeah, go ahead and, preach it. But what's happening, is attribution is fantastic, but it should not be used as the single source of truth. What it should be used as, and this is how we sort of preach it internally here, is it is really good specifically for directional purposes, right?
Yeah.
Because the performance channels, and again, I'm specifically thinking Google, Facebook, et cetera, are great at tracking obviously last click, but upper funnel activity is getting lost. And what ends up happening is your lower funnel activity is what actually gets the credit when something else actually caused the behavior you want, like clicking on an ad.
Totally.
And so what ends up happening is you end up sort of thinking incorrectly about how you want to go and allocate dollars.
Absolutely.
And you start thinking incorrectly about how you want to compensate your team. And you start thinking incorrectly about how to measure outcomes. And, I feel like, you hit like a really important point that I think a lot of marketers are struggling with right now. And, to me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that is why you have to have a full funnel view of what's happening from ad impression, ad click, all the way through to, a customer. And there isn't any buyer journey that is there. There's no two buyer journeys that are the same, right? They're always going to come in different points. There are multiple touches across the way. And if you can't see that along the what we call the life of the lead, what ends up happening is you get into a situation where you start thinking about only the thing that was at the end that caused the initial lead capture, as opposed to all of the touch points along the way. And
No, you nailed it. In fact, it's interesting you say it that way because I always tell our consultants here, when I worked at a lifestyle magazine, it was strictly branding. And I got frustrated not being able to have conversations with my clients a little bit more about their ROI and, the value of it. So when I came over to digital, talk about that pendulum, I swung far to the next side to where all I wanted to talk about was ROI.
Me too. Absolutely.
And
I'm
what I mean? And I
by the way, I'm totally reformed from that, but I was absolutely that guy. Yeah.
Well, same here. I would go to a client and I would talk about, oh, we can track this and this and this. And what ended up happening is people completely started to negate and ignore how many clicks we brought to the site, how much branding, how much awareness was also brought through this campaign, and that it might take time. And there's other methods to bring that buyer back. And let's not just totally ignore it. So I swung the other way. Then I kind of learned to swing kind of back to the middle to say, listen, let's talk more funnel. Let's talk about the importance of awareness, but and how that is so important to really nail the funnel in each step. But I did the same thing. Yeah.
I'm curious, like what caused that reformation? All right. So I have my own story. I'm just kind of curious, like what your story was. So there was a point where you said, I was all the way on this side, testing, tracking, like if I can't track it, I'm not doing it. Right.
Yeah.
And, you've obviously shifted that mindset. I'm curious, like what caused you to shift the mindset? Like, was there
great question. I truly believe, here at BigPxl, one thing that we've learned over the years is it's all about expectations. And when you're talking to a client, we want to lay the expectations out really clearly, because the last thing we want is them to be frustrated, thinking they're getting one thing and not getting the other. And I think what I sold so heavy on leads and ROI that the expectations weren't where I would like them to be right away. So I learned really quickly to say, listen, it's going to take time. We call it, the gumball marketing method. Put a quarter in, gumball shoots out. That's not what this is. And so really we started talking about, I've been in sales for 20 years and I'd learned a long time ago that earning someone's business, you'd rather tell them all the nitty gritty and the negative before getting it and set the expectations up appropriately. And so that was the big swing for us, which was that we need more than 3 months. We need time. And so we start saying like, look, it's like pushing a snowball up a hill. And there's some legwork, setting up campaigns, casting a wide net, creating that awareness, finding the correct audiences. That could take a little bit of time, but once we curate that and find that and then start working them through a funnel, once we get that snowball top of the hill and we push it over, it's going to start to compound and really go fast. And that could take 4 or 5 months. And so so expectations, to answer your question, setting appropriate expectations and making sure the client understood this is long-term. This is not something that's you're going to do really quickly. And this is not gumball marketing, where you put a quarter in, get a gumball out. And I think that to me allowed us to be able to talk about the whole comprehensive side, the funnel, awareness, and it all came together because we were trying to sell it and start having ROI conversations right away. It's just not realistic.
Yeah. So for me, I love your story, by the way. I think a lot of marketers, sort of face that. For me, it was maybe a little bit different. I was running marketing, at a B2B company, and my CPL was pretty dialed in. I mean, it was decent. I was optimized, right? I got my landing pages. They were converting, relatively well.
Did it take you a long time to get that figured out, or was that pretty quick, or what?
Well, it's my background is in testing and analytics. My past life, that's basically what I did, and so that's why. By the way, that's what ingrained in me the performance marketing mindset. was
Sure.
super, super focused on testing and analytics. And if I couldn't see it and A/B test it and, and
Yep.
track it like down to the click, I didn't want to talk about it. And so then I shifted into like running, marketing teams and that sort of thing. And one of the things, in this particular instance, I was running marketing for a B2B company, and I was, again, my leads were good. They were coming in at a good, sub $30, CPL for us in that space. It was pretty decent.
Yeah.
Some would say even great. But my CAC kept rising month over month over month over month. And my sales team would come to me and they would say, look, the stuff you're sending us, like something's going on. It's not as effective as it used to be. I remember when I hear that, I would hear that a lot, right? I remember, a year ago, like I would get leads and they would close, at 20% plus, close rate. And,
Yeah.
I would get, like people would like move through the funnel faster, like the pipeline would speed up, like more of these in-month type closes, like that stuff was going away and it caused the CAC to just sort of skyrocket. And it
Sure.
didn't happen all at once. I mean, it was just, it was an incremental increase, and then I'd get questions, from the CFO, and the CFO would come to me and say, well, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
and I would be looking at it and I'd say, well, we're generating the leads. The quantity is the same at or better on the CPL. And, and they were like, yeah, but the sales team's like half a quota. and that's when it sort of clicked for me. Is like, oh, okay.
Sure.
So, there's something missing. And you dive in, and what was happening without me really even knowing it, I was in a bubble of like or a vacuum of I'm optimizing for performance, right? I'm optimizing for, I'm going to dial it in. I'm going to generate more leads at lower CPL, and I'm going to do as much of that as I possibly can. So from my perspective, I was doing my job. But I wasn't looking holistically through the funnel, and I wasn't seeing what was happening. Were those leads actually turning into ops, and were those ops actually moving through the sales pipeline at a decent speed, and were they actually closing, and were they turning into revenue, right? And none of that stuff was I really looking at. And by the way, this is, that was a long time ago, right? And so but I, that's the way I sort of looked at things. And when I started seeing and started tracking, what is my cost per new op, right? What is my cost per new, or cost per, some stage further down in the pipeline, all of a sudden I realized what was actually happening. What was actually happening was, I was dialing in, squeezing things down, and I was actually sort of fishing from a really, really small pond, right?
Sure.
And the pond I was fishing in was full of really low quality minnows, right? And that quality of the MQL I was sending through never materialized, never did anything, right? And so that aha moment is really what sort of shifted the mindset. And then, started looking around and saying, okay, well, where's everybody at? Like, how do I expand the size of the pond that I'm fishing in? And that's when it got, that's when it, light bulb clicked. So, and it connects exactly to the same sort of story that you're talking about. So it's interesting.
Well, and we find it all the time too, that, at the end of the day, there's some skepticism with clients and marketers. And so we really fight that to just make sure they understand that we're here to really genuinely help them. And so we always start off with conversations like, hey, listen, I know something happened in the past, whatever. What's a win for you? That's a big question that we ask. How do we make this win? Like, what's a real lead or a conversion for you? And it's not just a click. or a phone call. It's a phone call that lasts a certain amount of time, right? It's a form fill. So we kind of separate out and call hard conversions and soft conversions. We really try to get into it, like you're saying, about understanding that, and then really trying to help educate them on how to obtain those goals. And really, we're super transparent with everything we do, and then really heavy on expectations and how it's going to work. And we've seen our retention just go through the roof by selling in that standpoint, so that when people do come and partner with us, they understand it's going to take some time, and we're going to work through it and analyze it like you're talking about.
So I'm always fascinated by actual like real life stories. I was just kind of curious, like, have you like what is a like everybody's different, everybody sort of comes to the table with different sort of stories, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what is a campaign that you have run that you were just over the moon about the results for? Can you walk me through like from campaign development, like the idea behind it that sparked it, and maybe just walk me through the steps of what happened, like what happened at the end, like what were the results,
Sure.
and like what was sort of the outcome. I'm always fascinated by like what's working. So.
Sure, I've got a couple quick ones for you. One of them was a vacation company, and their whole goal was to get phone call leads, and they wanted to focus in Orlando, Florida. And what we found is, we had made a mistake where we learned from it, was how many conversion paths to get a phone call, right? So ultimately, if they have to click on this, end up on a landing page, are we going to get a phone call, right? And Facebook had a phone call portion on their call to action, but didn't work really well at this time. And their whole thing was, we want phone numbers, and we want our call center to call people. So we created this beautiful guide called Things to Do in Orlando. And we found that the keyword Things to Do in Orlando was searched at a massive amounts. So it started out as the Orlando vacation guide, and we changed it to Things to Do in Orlando because that keyword, from a keyword standpoint, it made sense. And this, we put it on a landing page. We gated it. We made it the phone number was optional. So put your name and email. Phone number was optional. And our team did such a fantastic job of research and, hotels to stay, restaurants, things to do at Disney, just, an amazing job of research. And then we simply targeted families who like to travel, Disney lovers, Mickey Mouse lovers. Like, we found a Facebook audience that just made sense. And we started averaging 40 to 50 leads a day for them. And 80 to 85% had phone numbers attached to it. Now, keep in mind, phone number was optional. So we were not expecting that. We were able to hear recordings of people saying, "Hey, do you got that guide?" That type of thing. "Hey, where's that guide at?" But what we learned is the value of what we gave. That it was a resource that people valued, and it allowed them to have just a massive amounts of leads. So that's one campaign that I felt like was one where we were just like really hitting it well, doing well on that. The other one, which is really interesting, and I typically show this to client meetings, is we work with our local chamber, and we work. The whole goal for the chamber and our local chamber is they're looking for boomerangs, people who leave Springfield and then come back eventually, which I would fit. I lived in St. Louis and Miami, Florida, but I came back here for my family, and that would be a boomerang. And they're also looking to bring people from other cities who are looking to leave New York and California and the bigger cities. They want to come here. They're looking for the people who transplant, and they have donors who are invested in that. Well, one of the most powerful things that we were able to do was we took a landing page, we heat mapped it, and we saw that where people were clicking, they thought it was a hyperlink to download this guide. On the mobile version, we were able to flip the page so their call to action was up top. We did a ton of really cool things for their website, built a lot of nice guides. Long story short, COVID hit. And on March 25th, we got someone reached out to us to want to work with us. And they basically said, I live in this born and raised New York City girl, came across, live in Springfield. And my friends think I'm crazy, but I showed how well the city was put on display. And so now I want to move to Springfield. Much to my surprise, the people who did the marketing on this was BigPxl, and so that was like literally the day before COVID shut down locally our businesses. So we were able to show the value. And what I think the power in it was niche, right? This is the exact audience we want, super niche. And we were able to find a young lady in New York City who wants to move to Springfield because of the content and the marketing that we put out. To me, and when I show that when we're talking to clients, it's like, you can't get much nichier than that sometimes. And we were able to find exactly what their goals were. And to me, that's what makes what we do so powerful, and to be able to have those conversations and to strategize how to create a campaign that can connect those dots, and then to be able to sit down. We work with an international company that we bring them so many leads through what we do. And there's nothing more rewarding to know that you play that kind of role in helping a company. And it's organic. It's not, you got a lot of clicks, it's the full funnel, right? And so that's the part that I think is the most fun for us. Those are two case studies I use a lot with people.
I love that, because I think, that's very practical, the way that, most users are coming through. You're looking at, the particular piece of content, you're building that content that is going to actually solve a need, that somebody has, a pain point that somebody has. You build a little bit of a relationship, a little bit of trust, right? And, something, some good comes out of that. And I think, it's funny, I wrote a LinkedIn post, I don't know, it was a day or two ago, where I was talking about how, this kind of activity is actually measurable, right? And actually ROIable. But the challenge is, if you have what I'm going to call sort of your marketing stack that is piecemeal together, for lack of a better word, right? So you've got an example would be, I've got my email solution, plus I've got my CRM, plus I've got my chat bot, plus I've got my landing page builder, plus I've got my form capture, or whatever. And you're sort of like trying to stitch all of those things together. What you end up losing is a lot of the power of understanding what's going on with the customer all the way through. I'm just kind of curious, prior to, what you're using today, like how did you deal with clients? Because obviously not every client is using sort of a holistic platform like SharpSpring. What is it that, how do you deal with the tools and the, every agency is the same, right? They sort of inherit these things and they got to make it work. So I'm just kind of curious, you have examples of that?
I do. And it's such a great question. I think that in the last 4 years, we've evolved, and the pandemic has changed everything, I think, in digital marketing. And the reason I say that is, I think what happened with a lot of businesses is there was an immediate fear, because there's a lot of shutdowns, and then everyone had to be online. And I think everyone saw the importance and the power of being online. And I know myself and some local competitors that I've talked to that we have built more websites in the last year and a half. And I think what happened was everyone sat down and said, okay, let's shift we got to be online. Well, we don't have a very good website, or our website's not really ready for it, or whatever. And a lot of people have started getting more integrated with online marketing, that maybe have just said, oh, we've had success. We've been around for 30 years and we do well. We don't need to worry about that. And so for us, I think what we've found and where we've had a lot of success lately is, how do we make it more simple? How do we simplify all these channels? And we gave a seminar about a month ago at our local chamber, and it was called Trying to Simplify Complexity. And that's really, I think, the struggle and the rub for a lot of people in today's day and age is, they spent a lot of years. You think before the 2000s, it was TV, radio, and billboards and magazines. And over time, you tried multiple channels and eventually you figured out which one probably works best for your company. Well, now we have those same traditional media outlets, but then we have all these different types of channels online, different ways of doing it, just like you're talking about. You can do Google ads, Facebook ads. You can make sure you have a chat bot. Is it automated? Does it work through a funnel? There's so many avenues that can make someone's head spin, or the amount that it would cost to do everything is just astronomical. So what we found, and we rolled out, how we fixed it, was something that was a barrier for our consultants. Is how do I go in and have a good meeting and hone in on what they really need based around their budget. So here's what we've done. We've created we've compartmentalized it. It's a simple 3-phased approach. And first phase starts with your website. Second phase is traffic. And the third phase is inbound. And what we always explain it to, we give the analogy of like a retail store. If you don't have a good retail store and that people can go to, you're not going to sell your product. Okay, great. You've got a nice retail store, your website. Now you got to get traffic to it. Pretty simple. Are you in the right area, the right audience? Do you understand that traffic? Is that traffic being optimized? And that's where that awareness, the consideration stage, that's your Facebook ads, your Google ads. It could be trade shows. It could be some traditional media. What do people do when they see something? They go to your website. No matter where you're at, it's a sales rep, you're going to look them up online. So that all kind of falls into the second phase of traffic. The third one is we know that a lot of people will come to your site, but 97% won't convert, right? The conversion side is not that high. We can have tools like remarketing and some things that we can do to try to lower that number. But at the end of the day, especially if a larger, longer buying cycle, people are going to come to your site and leave and not really necessarily engage. So that's that third phase of inbound where we start talking to them about, okay, you've got a great website, you've got a great storefront. We figured out the right channels to get people to your site and storefront. Now we got to figure out how to keep them coming back or engage them and qualify them and make sure that it makes sense for you. And that's where those MQLs, gated content, so marketing qualified leads to sales qualified leads, working them through that funnel, nurturing those. So what we do with a lot of our clients is we say, hey, where are you at? Which phase are you at? Some come in, we got to start with phase 1. We got to rebuild. We got to build your site first. Some come in, great website, but they've never done a lot of traffic building, so we start there and we're focused on getting those right channels. But we always have that end goal in mind of if you want to really work through that funnel and understand it and have real solid leads. So it allows us to work with clients that are super niche-y, where we can build out specific personas and do a lot of really great things. And they don't have to handle a lot of big companies, we don't want to handle every single phone call that comes in. Some big accounting firms, they only want to handle massive companies. They don't want Joe Blow's $500 tax return, right? So we can now create a custom campaign that's tailored to those types of leads. And we break it into 3 separate compartments. Phase 1, website. Phase 2, traffic building. And phase 3, inbound. And it helps simplify it. And it helps them, because sometimes people may end up needing the third one, but they just got to get their brains wrapped around phase 1 first, and then phase 2. So we've had a lot of success, because I think that's the biggest avenue and barrier is the complexity in so many channels. How do we simplify it for them to where they're not overwhelmed? And because then you start tapping into that insecurity, and then they just don't want to mess with it. And so that's how we operate today. But we learned the hard way. It wasn't that way a couple of years ago.
So take that like one step further. So you've got a campaign up and it's running, it's working, and you've built it out. How do you communicate what's working, what's not working? Like, how does that show up in things like reporting back to the client? Like, how are you, every agency is different in the fact, in the way that they communicate, like what's working and what's not working. I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you do it?
Honestly, it starts, in my opinion, with the pre-sale. It starts with our consultant setting good expectations. Where we have had the most success is we have our team and our client is super engaged together. If you have someone who kind of standoffish and doesn't really want to engage and they don't respond or approve what you're trying to do, it can really be difficult. So one of the biggest, I think the biggest first step is to make sure that you're setting expectations in the sales process to say, hey, listen, do we have a go-to? There's going to be a lot of content. There's going to be a lot of approvals. We're going to have to work together as a team. Obviously, we know your business as much as we can, but we need to really integrate. I think to really have success, you have to integrate pretty deep into their business. And ultimately, you're not going to be able to do that day one. So you need someone who's really involved on their side, or it falls, or it doesn't work. Honestly, in my opinion, it doesn't work as well. So that's the first step. And then the second step is a really good onboarding and setup process, and with clear expectations. You know, do you have contacts? How many are they? Are we segmenting those out? You know, really understanding that setup side of it, and then the strategic side, making sure it's always very, you know, if they have a marketer on their team that can really help communicate their audience. And then us coming down and sitting there saying, okay, look, we got to make sure we're driving the correct traffic to these specific landing pages. Here's what we're looking at audience wise, making sure it aligns with, you know, Google's quality scores, making sure that the right keywords are on that page. And then ultimately a lot of communication, expectations, great onboarding, starting those personas out and letting them evolve and change as the data comes in. Like you said earlier, A/B testing, we test call to actions where we had a green square download button. We turned it to a blue rounded download button, and it doubled the clicks. Then we turned it to a download now with an exclamation point rounded button, and it almost tripled the clicks. So, you know, and then testing a cartoon background with a live picture background and running those side by side, putting heat maps. Understanding with one of our dentist office, we found with our heat maps that people were really interested in sedation dentistry, right? And so we said, wow, we asked them, do you guys get a lot of questions on sedation dentistry? And they're like, well, yeah, a little bit, you know. So what did? We made a video and we gated it and we promoted it, and it went really well. So I think there's just a lot of being able to be nimble, fluid, communicate, over communication, having a partnership with the team, with your own team, but the client, they really need to be engaged as well. That for us is when we have our most success, is when all of those are aligned. The consultants sold it with the right expectations. We onboard really well. Their team's engaged, helping us understand it and communicate it, and then running the appropriate tests, and then knowing that we have time to do and move those levers. When we do that, we have a lot of success with our clients.
Yeah.
So that's where that's my soapbox.
I think that's the interesting approach. I mean, there's the thing to me, if you break it out, you know, it really does boil into the sort of the buckets or the pieces that you were just talking about. I think also it's difficult to create full funnel reporting if you're not, you can't do it piecemeal, right? So, I mean, like if you've got data in 5 different places, you know, not only does it take you way too long to actually create reports and, you know, put them together for leadership or the client, you know, or whoever it is, it's also the fact that you're just in a position of not having the full picture, right? Yeah. So you have this tool over here that's giving you, you know, their snapshot, and you've got this tool over here that's giving you its snapshot, and you got this tool over here and it's giving you its snapshot, and then you're forced together, or like forced to put the picture together, right? And nobody has time for that as an agency. Like you're already stretched pretty thin. You know, you're trying to help your client. You need to focus more on the campaigns. Nobody has time to create, you know, 16 different reports and try to normalize it all and pull it together into something that they can then communicate to the client, right? So, and I've seen that more often than I can count with agencies where they just, you know, they've got nothing but report putter togetherers, right? Yeah. That's all they do. And, you know, and it's like, yeah, but if you're spending time putting those reports together, you're not actually spending time looking at the data to be able to act on it in a relatively real-time environment, right?
Yep.
In fact, you're just really, you only do the reports at the time that you put it together for the client, right?
Yep.
As opposed to actually looking at the data along the way to make course corrections in campaigns. And having it all in one place really does, sort of give you that quick turn, quick iteration kind of capability.
It does. We have strategists dedicated to just that with clients, which is focus on overseeing the project, but then on making sure they understand the reporting and how it's working and how, how does my inbound work with my Google ads, my SEO, my creative. We create something called the flex budget where there's a lot of creativity that needs to go with your inbound, right? We need to make videos. We need to do this, gated content pieces. So it's really important to have a strategy for that, because that's that content, making sure it's good content that pulls people in and they say, wow, I want that information. I have to give credit to the lifestyle magazine I used to work for. The owner was a visionary, and he when he first purchased the magazine, he got some good advice, and it was do refrigerator journalism for your magazine. Well, what's refrigerator journalism? Top 5 places to eat, top 3 this, top 4 this, top 5 this, right? And he built the magazine on that, and it was a powerhouse magazine, and still is to this day. And ultimately, that type of content, we've all been there. If you see top 3 questions to ask your financial advisor, you don't even really need to, you may not even have a financial advisor, but you might click on it and you skip down and you want to know what the top 3 questions are, right? We've all done it. And it's just being able to understand how to write good content, how to develop good content that makes people really want to engage. Because you can have all the great strategies and analytics and data, but if you don't have great content and you don't have something people want to read or look at, it's going to fall flat. So you really have to have a good strategic team really thinking through that and understanding that.
That's right. So what's your, as you're thinking about 2022, like what, do you have any big initiatives, things that you're working on, things that you're heading towards where you're excited, like we're finally here, we're gonna go and tackle this thing? Is there any like big initiatives for you?
We do. We have, we're a full service agency, and we've done everything from display ads to YouTube, Google ads, Facebook. We've even helped people place their traditional media. And we have photography, videography. We build websites. We have developers on staff. And so ultimately, our goal in 2022 is to really focus on that 3-phased approach: websites, traffic, and inbound. But what we're trying to do with a lot of our clients is to say, hey, listen, we're really focusing on the client that fits inbound, which is, hey, research or educational, longer buying cycles, right? Inbound would never work for pizza. I want to buy a pizza. Obviously, it's not going to be a tool. But cosmetic surgery, right? You don't just roll out of bed and decide you need a facelift or a tummy tuck or something like that. So ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to research, and you're going to end up on websites, and you're going to need content delivered to you. You're going to take your time. So we really our goal is to focus on clients that fit inbound, and so we can sell in this 3-phased approach for them that says, listen, we call it like a monkey's paw, so it's like, hey, you may not be ready for inbound today, but we're going to get you there. And by partnering with us, we're going to first focus on your website. We're going to turn it into a marketing machine and be ready for traffic, Facebook ads, Google ads, SEO, whatever it is that people come to your sites. Some people, they do some Google ads and Facebook ads, but they go to trade shows and they see massive amounts of traffic from those trade shows. So whatever that is, we're going to help you focus on making sure that that's optimized and you understand those channels. And we understand that data. That's super important. And then from there, inbound. How do we work them into inbound appropriately? That's our initiative in 2022, is to get where we're focusing on that structured kind of path. Someone comes to us with a great website and they've run Facebook ads and Google ads and they have kind of a good understanding of that. Great. You're already to phase 2. Let's go right into inbound. So ultimately, that's where we're really kind of niching up a little bit and focusing in more on that and targeting those types of clients as well. So we feel like that's a way for us to really show value and really get in there and kind of rub shoulders with our clients. And that's what we want. So that's our initiative. That's our goal, is to really focus on those three phases. And ultimately our goal is to land on the third phase. So,
So yeah, I mean, you have a growth trajectory, right? Milestones that each one of them has to hit. And sometimes when a client comes into you, they're in a middle stage, not the beginning stage, right? And
exactly.
so you're more of an acceleration as opposed to, getting somebody, putting the framework together.
Totally.
So if you think about that, that's very interesting. I mean, there is a framework, you're, being able to walk a client through its various sort of life cycle stages. That's kind of cool.
Well,
So,
in my history and working with clients, if it's overwhelming, it's hard for them to have success. So that's for us. How do we segment it out? And I think that really helps make something complex a little bit more simple, because we used to try to sell inbound with everything, and we still will, and we still do with the clients at the point of that. And so that's ultimately our goal. But when someone comes in and they're pretty green, you'd be surprised. There's a lot out there that's like, we've never done digital marketing. This website was built by my son 12 years ago. When you get there, to try to throw all of that at them at once is a little too overwhelming. So this part has helped us really help grow a client the right way. And because once you get into inbound, there's so much value there that it's like, we're gonna nurture you along. You're gonna crawl, then you're gonna walk, and then you're gonna run with us.
I'm asking you all of the questions. I was just kind of curious. Any questions for me? Anything I could help you with?
Yeah, what's your thoughts? I feel like ultimately the pandemic has, and I read it somewhere. I can't remember where I read this, but so the pandemic has forced users in an online presence projected about 10 years faster than normal.
Yeah.
Because and we've seen it here locally. Some competitor I've talked to, they've seen it as well, where companies that probably were 10 years away from doing some things that they're doing now were forced to kind of do that. What is the pandemic? What have you guys seen through the pandemic? Have you seen a big shift? What's that shift look like? I know what we've seen on our end. I'm just curious if it marries well with what you guys have seen.
So yeah, I think that's exactly right. The type of businesses that are forced to accelerate since March of 2020 has been, I mean, it's been dramatic, right? The interesting thing to me is this is all stuff that should have been done before COVID.
Yeah,
But businesses are always going to, be in certain segments anyway are going to be, laggards, in terms of, like adopting technology, that sort of thing. So I'm going to use the example of like the music industry. When I say music, I mean like retail, like, musical instrument shops and stuff like that. Like the, you look at that specific category and it's a niche within a niche, but when you look at it, it's really, really small. And yet, still to this day, like I look at those businesses and hardly any of them have like an online presence. These are services too. These are like repair shops, and these are, they sell lessons or whatever. And the thing that I kind of look at is COVID really brought together a need to be able to, for B2B companies to think like B2C companies.
yeah,
And so B2C companies, i.e., you got a widget on your website and you're just click to sell. B2B has always been reliant on the sales team, right? Always
yeah,
been that way. And marketing typically anyway has always reported into you know an organization that is led by a sales team in B2B historically.
yeah,
And now what you see is a whole sort of shift of marketing taking a larger role in the strategic direction of the organization because they have to. The sales team is no longer able to go out to a conference, or well, was not anyway. That's changing now. But, they were not able to do that. They were not able to go and do field sales anymore, right? You couldn't go into a location.
Down.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and all of that was, sort of forced into a new scenario, and you had to react quickly. And I think a lot of agencies benefited by that digitalization, right? Just moving that, transitioning into this. Now, here's the question. The question is, what happens now that you can do a field sales team? What happens now when you can do?
Do you abandon it, or do you?
Conferences? That's right. What did we learn during the time, right? What did we learn as marketers and sales teams and organizations? What did we learn to decide whether or not, what was working and what wasn't working? Because I guarantee you there are a lot of budgets right now that are being developed, or have been over the last couple of months developed for 2022. Some of those dollars are going back into what they used to do 2 years ago. Even if it wasn't working, even if it wasn't solid.
Because they're used to it.
Because they were used to it, and because because they have been waiting for the day where they can sort of go out and do the thing.
They get emotional about it too. Sometimes it's like, I've done this for 20 years, and this is how I built my business, and
Right. But the problem is, and I'm afraid to say it, but the reality is it's never going to work the way that it used to work. And people going back to trade shows, people going back to these other types of conferences, or in-person events, things like that, there's a way to do it really well. But I think the way that we sort of used to do it is done. And because buyers are different today, even in the last 2, 3, 4 years, they've gotten less reliant on those kinds of interactions to make purchasing decisions. And, now they're totally comfortable, looking at things like G2 for software solution, or they're, comparing, solutions, or they're totally fine going and, getting on LinkedIn or on a social channel and listening to what colleagues have to say, online, and in Slack channels, and having conversations and listening to, like this, they're on a podcast, or there's an audience right now that's listening to this podcast, and they're getting information, ideas, inspiration, ways to do things differently. And, they didn't have that capability or rely on it as heavily, or are now as comfortable, right, as they were. Right. Yeah. And so I'm interested to see what happens over the next 2 years. There are going to be businesses, specifically in B2B, where there are ones that are going to continue to accelerate, right? So you sort of hit the gas, in this digitalization over the last couple of years, and the question is do you let off the gas, or do you double down? Or do you go back to the way that you were doing things, right? And so that I'm interested to see what the next couple of years looks like. It's going to be fun.
It will.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, by the way. This is a lot of fun.
I did too. Yeah.
I think there was a lot of really meaty topics in there, and there's people are going to get a lot out of it, and we should do it again sometime.
Hey, anytime. It's been great. I appreciate you having me on. I really do. And if you ever want to talk about anything else, I'm available, or my team. If you want to get into the weeds really deep with some of my team that are doing more, then just let me know. I'd be happy to have someone come on and talk more. So
sounds great. All right. We'll talk to you soon.